The aim of today's tutorial is to show you how you can create those abstract background satisfying elements that are just added to give some more life to your product animations. But apart from that, since it is very important to know how you can set up scenes for modern product animations, I'll go ahead and teach you step by step how to create this complete scene. And you can swap the main object with anything that you please. And with that, let's begin the tutorial. To start off, we'll be creating those modern shapes that'll act as our background elements. We'll tap X to delete the default cube, and instead of using a cylinder or something like that, we're going to press Shift A and search for a Bezier circle curve. So the reason we're using this Bezier circle curve is because in the object data properties or the curve properties, you have a resolution that can be changed at any point of time based on your requirements and the number of elements you have present in your scene or the size that it appears. So for now, let's just increase this up to 64 to make it really nice and smooth, and then we can rotate it on the x-axis by 90 degrees. And the next reason as to why we're using a Bezier circle instead of a torus is because under the geometry tab over here, you can go to the bevel and change the bevel depth whenever you please. So if you want certain things to be really fat, you can make it really fat. If you want them to be thin, you can make them really thin. So for now, we'll just keep it at a depth of something like 0.45, and we'll change the resolution as well to 32, because if you currently look at the resolution, they have jagged edges, so we can increase the resolution to make them nice and smooth. So now that we have this really cool donut, the base effect for all of the different shapes that you saw are just different versions of the same modifier. In the modifier properties, you can go ahead and add in a simple deform modifier and just play around between the twist, bend, taper, and stretch. So first up, let's just go to frame 0, change the bend angle to something slightly higher. Let's go with 90, and then tap I, and then by around frame 15, which is half a second later, we can change this to -90, and then tap I, and then by frame 30, which is 1 second from the original, we can take the original keyframe, press Shift D, and just bring it over there. So now when you play the animation, this is the animation that you get, but you see the animation just stops after frame 30, and instead of repeating keyframes, a very easy method to make this loop is by tapping A to select all the keyframes, pressing Shift E and selecting make cyclic. So that way, when you play the animation, it's going to perfectly cycle about. And remember, as long as the end frame is a multiple of this number over here, wherever you have the second keyframe, the animation will be a perfect loop as well. So in this case, we can end the animation at 300, and that way we get a 10-second long animation which perfectly loops. So that looks great, and that could just be the first animation. Based on which direction you're looking at it from, you get different sorts of fields. So in this case, you get this sort of an animation, but if you look at it from the side, you get this sort of a motion, and these are just different scenarios that you can use with this animation. But the next thing that you can do is press Shift D, X, and move it to the side, and this time choose bend instead of twist. So now when you play the animation, this is the type of bending that you get. Now of course, this isn't exactly the type of bending that I would want. What I can do is try playing around with the angles or the axes, and in this case, I can see on the z-axis we get quite a cool animation. However, it feels like it's stretching a bit too much. So in this situation, I can come here and just change this from 90 to 45 so that it's not that extreme. Then add in the keyframe, select this one, press Shift D, and bring it over right there. Now when you play the animation, you see this side is still going too far because we haven't changed this to -45, and then tap I, and now you have this sort of an animation. Now I think this would look even better if this was a bit thinner. So I'll go to my data properties, go down to the bevel, and just reduce the depth to 0.25. Now that looks great. You can always change the playback from play every frame to frame dropping, and that way you get a realistic idea of the speed of these animations, and that looks okay. Next, I can select this, press Shift D, X, and bring it to the side, and this time for the modifiers, let's choose taper, and now you get this sort of an animation. So that looks great, and again, you can always play around with the amount this moves by playing around with the values of the keyframe, but I'll leave it as is for now, and then Shift D, X, bring it over to the side, and this time I'm switch it over to stretch. So then I think these two are way too high. I have to play around with the actual factor values. So here, if we try and reduce the factor, it seems like it's working, but when you play the animation, you see that it doesn't work, and that's because the keyframes are added for the bend angle, and we need to change them for the stretch factor if you want to change these. So let's go ahead and delete these keyframes and just play around with the factor. So here I can tap I, go to again maybe frame 15, and reduce the factor down to maybe -0.4, and then tap I, and then select this one, press Shift D, and bring it over to 30. Now as usual, we're gonna have to extrapolate it and make it cyclic. So press A to select everything, Shift E, and make cyclic. So that way we get a cyclic animation for this as well. So now that we have these different animations created, you wouldn't want all of them to be moving in the exact same rhythm. So right now they're following the same phase. To play around with the phase, all you do is just press G and move these by some number of frames, and that way they're not going to be moving in the same way as the others. So it's just like you are randomizing it, and that makes it feel just a little better. Now that you have these 4 different shapes, you can go ahead and just add in the base structures. So we press Shift A and search for a mesh plane, press S and scale it up by something like 10 units, and then press tab to go into the edit mode. Go to edge select mode by pressing this button here, selecting the edge back there and pressing EZ and moving it up by 10 units. Then you can select this junction edge over here and press Ctrl B to add in a bevel. So just move your mouse back to create the bevel, and then use your scroll wheel to increase the number of cuts to make it nice and smooth. Then press tab to go into object mode, right click and click Shade Auto Smooth. Then press Shift A and search for a cylinder and go down here and increase the number of vertices all the way to something like 128 to make it nice and smooth, and then press SZ to just scale it down, and then S Shift Z to scale it on every axis except for the Z axis. Apart from that, we don't want these to have sharp edges, so we go to the modifier panel and add in a bevel modifier. Now you see the bevel is stretched over on the top, and that's because we did not apply scale. So let's press Ctrl A and click apply scale, and that way the bevel is much better, and we can go ahead and just increase the number of segments to something like 5 and reduce the amount from 0.1 to maybe 0.05, and that looks a lot better. Then again, right click Shade Auto Smooth, and we get this really smooth table. Let's press Shift D to duplicate it, scale it down again on everything but the Z axis, so make sure you press Shift Z and then press GZ and bring it up by maybe 0.2 units or how much ever you feel comfortable with. That's our podium. So now we can go ahead and place our camera. So let's select the camera, press Alt G to clear location, Alt R to clear rotation. RX90 will rotate it on the X axis by 90 degrees, GZ can move it up on the Z axis, and GY can bring it back on the Y axis. Then you can press 0 on your numpad to go into the camera view and continue to press GY and just bring it back till you're somewhere with the zoom that you think is enough, and then just select these objects, press G and place them in your scene howsoever you please. Let's just take that, press G and move it, scale it down, maybe rotate this one a bit, then select this, press G, bring it in here, rotate it, press S to scale it down, maybe make this other direction, take this, press Shift D, bring it here, scale, rotate it, and just place these all over the scene. I didn't have to press Shift D back then, I could have just placed them, but once you place them, then continue pressing Shift D and moving these around, scaling them, rotating them randomly. And also while doing all this, you can make sure that you give these a random phase offset as well by just selecting these keyframes and pressing G when you select these. So that way each of them will have random phase offsets as well, and they'll be oriented randomly, and you overall get pretty filled background. Once you're happy with the position of all of these, remember they're currently not behind or in front of the main podium. If you go to 7 to go into your top view, you see they're all present in the exact same line. So if you want, you can actually just move a few of these front and a few of these back, add in even more depth, and in case your product is a product that might involve that 3D aspect, it'll look better when all of these are present in actual 3-dimensional space instead of on the exact same line. So once you're happy with the position of everything, you can go ahead and add in your actual main object. So since I don't have a product that I want to show in this particular video, I'm just going to add in a gear. So with the extra objects enabled, I'll go to mesh, gears, and just choose a normal gear. I'll come down here and just bring it up on the Z axis so that I can see it before I lose this panel, and I'll also rotate it on the X axis by an arbitrary 45 degrees. After that, I can play around with the width and the base and things like that just to get something that I like. Of course, all of this is your own personal preference, but once I'm happy with that, again, just GZ, bring it up, scale it down by a bit, and I don't want this inner sections to be seen, so I'll press tab to go into edit mode, just alt shift click this entire ring, alt shift click this entire ring, and press Ctrl E and select bridge edge loop, so that way the inside is no longer seen, and then I can always right click Shade Auto Smooth, and that way we get this really nice gear. But of course, as all satisfying animations are, looks much better when we add in some bevel. Let's go ahead and go to the add modifiers, add in a bevel modifier, and reduce the amount down to 0.02, and then just increase the number of segments, so that makes it really nice and smooth. Then we can definitely add in some more of these if you want, so maybe press Shift D, S, scale it down by maybe 0.7, and then press GX twice to move it on the local X axis, which for now is global X axis. But when we try moving it on the Y axis, the local Y axis would make more sense than the global Y axis. So once you're happy with that, again, just rotate it on the local Z and press Shift Z so that it doesn't move on the local Z, and just place it till you are happy with the positioning. So I think something like that is fine. Maybe I can scale it up again and just position it. I'll do the same thing again on the other side. So I'll just take this itself, press Shift D and move it on everything but the local Z axis. So Shift Z twice and then just bring it to about there. Once I'm happy with that, I would want all of these to rotate. I'll press Shift A and search for an empty plane axis, press GZ to move it up, and then select all three of these by pressing Shift and select, and finally press Shift select and select the empty. Then press Ctrl P, set parent to object. Now you can just animate the empty. So on frame 0 I can select only the empty, press I rotation, and then on frame 300 I can say RZ 360 I rotation. Now down here press T linear so that it moves in a smooth loop, and this is the animation that we currently have. Because we moved all of these in 3-dimensional space, you see there's not going to be any intersection, and this looks good enough. Now that we're done with this, we can go ahead and set all of our defaults and start with the actual texturing. Let's go to our render properties, switch on ambient occlusion, expand this, increase the distance to something high. Let's go with 100, maybe increase the factor to 2 as well, and I'll just switch on bloom and screen space reflections. Then I'll go to my output properties, change the frame rate to maybe 30 fps, end frame is already at 300. Output folder, you can choose wherever you want to store it. File format, we're going to choose FFmpeg video. Encoding, we can change the container from Matroska to MPEG-4, and output quality, we can choose perceptually lossless. Then we can change our viewport shading to rendered, and we can go to our world properties and increase the background color all the way to the brightest white. Okay, I feel like the ambient occlusion distance is a bit too high, so let's go back and change the distance from 100 meters down to 10 meters. I meant to make it 10. I don't know why I did 100, but alright, that seems fine. Now we can go ahead and start giving some materials, but before we do that, let's actually fix the lighting first. So we already have the default light, and that's present at an alright position, but the shadows are far too sharp, and to fix that, we can go to the data properties of the light and increase the radius up to something like 1 meter, and that way the shadows become nice and soft. And because we're doing that, we can increase the power as well to maybe 5000 watts, and we can press Shift D to create another version and maybe light it from the left hand side just like this. Now to get that modern look, it's best that you follow some modern color palettes, and you can find color palettes on various websites. I use colorhunt.co, and this is a nice palette that I want to use for this animation. So I can go ahead and just click these to copy the hex values, and then back in my Blender scene, I can just select an object, go to the materials, add in a new material, and change this from principled BSDF to just a diffuse BSDF, and then select this color, go to the hex value and press Ctrl V, enter. So that way we get that particular color added in here. Let's increase the roughness all the way to 1, and that's actually it. Now this isn't actually a perfect representation of that color, because for our color management we have it set to filmic, and that changes the color a bit, but I think that's all right for this particular situation. You can always go to standard and increase the contrast and things like that, but for now I'm just going to keep it at filmic and with a look of none. Then I'll just select all of these objects, and then finally select this one again and press Ctrl L and choose link materials, and all of them get that material applied. Next, for the background, let's select this particular color, select this, go to the materials, add in a new material and change this to diffuse, go to the hex value and press Ctrl V. For the bases, again add in a new material, change it to diffuse, paste the correct hex value, increase the roughness, select this, shift select this one, Ctrl L, link materials. I also think that I want the background and these foreground elements to have the materials swapped. So I'll first select the background, hover over this color and just press Ctrl C to copy it. Then I'll go ahead and choose material 1 for the background. Then I will select any one of these to get material 1 and just press Ctrl V to paste that material. Then let's go to the background, select the material, come here, hex and paste it. Next, the main object can have whatever the actual object's colors are supposed to be. In this case, I just want to make one of them slightly darker, so let's change this to a diffuse BSDF and make it fairly dark gray with a roughness set to max. The others I can just keep on this default white itself with absolutely nothing added in. Now, I think the bloom isn't helping in my situation, so I'm just going to switch off bloom, and that just looks a lot better. Next, just to fill up these blank spaces at the bottom, I'll press Shift A and search for a cube, and then as usual I'll add in some bevel modifiers to this cube. Let's increase the number of segments to something like 5 and right click shade auto smooth. I also want to reduce the amount to 0.05, and that looks good enough. Now I can just press G and place this cube somewhere towards the side, so let's have it like about there. Then RZ to just rotate it and give this the last material from the palette. So just add in a new material, change it to diffuse, change the color hex value to what you just copied, increase the roughness all the way to 1, and you are set. Then just press Shift D, Shift Z and place these cubes around the scene here and there. Make sure you change the rotations, make sure you change the sizes by pressing S and bringing it down, and just place them, rotate them, and you should be fairly good to go with this sort of a setup. And that's about it. If you're happy with your animation, you can go ahead and press render animation. I hope this enables you to create a few animations for different scenarios. Of course, you could use some text in the middle or absolutely whatever you please. If you have any suggestions as to what you want to see being created in the next video, let me know down below, and I'll definitely try and create as many of the ones that I can create. I post videos every single day, so I'm sure there's something or the other present on my channel that's just waiting for you to discover. And until the next video comes out tomorrow, thank you so much for watching, and stay creative.